Isn't that it? Schwarzwarp? There was once a boy who discovered a forest and was told never to go therein. So he soon did. And in fact, his life became devoted to the full exploration thereof. After some years passed, and he was fairly well acquainted with the general area, his purpose became to lay a trail of breadcrumbs into its deepest recesses and not be able to ever find his way back out. If your mind is mostly occupied with thinking about things others have mentioned and pondering questions they have raised, then non-physically you are displaying all the signs of submission a passive prisoner does when captured. All talk of a promised land of freedom is illusion tossed to the wind until one is in full and continuing realization that man is naturally born in captivity and that such is his normal state. If you're right, on a recent program you compared the mind attempting to understand itself to a tree trying to climb itself. And I just wanted to say how intriguing I found the description, and that the fact that I wish to God I'd never heard it. Yours, etc. There was once a mighty king who had two armies. One was in charge of planning, and the other in charge of doing. Now, for a small prize, can you tell me the name of this king? And don't try to slip in your own or even that of man. Contrary to their claims, it's not so much a matter of men learning valuable new lessons from the minor tragedies of their lives as it is for them having something new to yak about. There is a certain kind of sailor whose vessel is at its most stable when the seas are at their worst. A man who for many years had been involved in a certain out-of-the-ordinary activity regarding his own inner head life had his mind say to him one day, "Tell me this, just what's going to happen if you ever do manage to untangle and figure me out completely? Then what?" But the man was smart enough to recognize a scare tactic when he saw one. On certain battlefields in other galaxies, those already wounded and on the ground have dread of a further injury, one not physically inflicted. A man decided to write a book and chose the title, "Why Are We Here?" then disappeared. One man wrote stories in an attempt to keep from having to live life. Another painted pictures and another composed music. Once and lump it, all art is an effort to find something to do other than simply live life. Now ask yourself, how much more so is it with those who struggle to make the unfolding of their own mind their art? If the mystical adventure is the ultimate distraction, what does that say about the indigenous attraction of routine existence? One man spoke in metaphors, lest he slip up and accidentally speak plainly. One day, one man's thoughts said to him, "Can Billy come out and play?" And he suddenly realized that for many years he had been absent-mindedly acquiescing to such matters, with his intellect having reached its present age without him actually knowing where its time had been spent. In case a different view might be of passing assistance, you could look upon the attempt to influence and change one's consciousness as an anomalous, near unnatural use of the brain. Really? Definitions time. Predictability, a simple man's drug of choice. Predictability, life's local preference of drug for the civilized. Predictability. As concerns the anxious, what can you say? To an ant, every foot is a foe, and to a deer, every carnivore. But note, the dangers to each creature are selective and limited, save with man in the matter of his mind. Although when described thusly, it seems an irrefutable fact, there are in fact no irrefutable facts. If thinking was a sport, the mind would be like a boxer who, with every blow taken, becomes meaninglessly stronger. There was once a man who discovered an unusual fruit, which he offered to share with others. But they said they preferred the old ones to which they were accustomed. So he thought about it, then told them that the new fruit contained everything that they enjoyed about the old ones. But still they resisted. So he tried telling them that it was in fact the original, superior version of what their present fruit had become. But they'd have none of it. So he said that the new fruit was the modern ultimate edition of their well-known variety. But alas, still no go. So he finally just took their old fruit and stuffed a new one into it. Worrying about problems give ordinary men headaches. Worry over having a head can do the same for a few. Note, items such as this can be heard by quite sane, sophisticated men, and they'll say that they don't get it, but don't bet on it. Poverty equals freedom in every possible sense you can think of, and then some. In fact, and then a lot. A man comfortable on the porch has far too many possessions to ever leave. Life in a better world. Proverbs are to behavior as proverbs should be to thinking. Surveying the history of Homo internalist, one guy mused, could man have possibly conjured up notions of gods any dumber than the ones he has? And answered his own question by realizing that yes, he could have, had he himself been a bit more dumber. And somewhere, far, far away in obscure corners of the universe, the little spirits of unborn scientific theories cry out, "Unfair, unfair." Caution, warning alert, potential danger. Life is not falling apart until you are. And life is not unfair until you get mad. Caution, don't say I didn't warn you. And now our inspirational thought for the day. A clever man can, through words, do most anything, except get butter back into a cow. There are many different stages and steps in all that man does, but only the middle ones are important. They're the only ones that are real. It is only at the illusionary verbal extremes exist such things as mortgages on a farm and the kindness of waiters. Does it ill behoove us for me to point out again periodically that, believe it or don't, that all of these on one page are actually connected? It is only at the, remember this clever man can do anything except get butter back into a cow, and then it points out that in the stages of life it's only the middle that counts, and it's only at the illusionary extremes of man's verbal reality that exist such things as, just think of one, as mortgages on a dairy farm, like a farm, and the solicitousness, the kindness of waiters. 'Tis only in the middle of the ocean that true adventure exists. There's a man who says that if it isn't one thing, it's 14 others. And even when it's not, it's still the one thing. Another way to look at the various mystical rituals and disciplines, even though their ultimate purpose be hard to define, is that at the very least they give one something out of the ordinary to do in a world of things most ordinary. For his term paper, one lad submitted the following: without a mind, man would not be able to try and explain his existence, regardless of his unsatisfactory results. But regardless of his less than satisfying results in explaining his existence, without a mind, he'd never feel the need to try. Now, what do you think of that? And on the paper, the instructor wrote, I ask the questions around here. Each individual's relationship to the whole of humanity can be expressed in a certain equation, whose existence remains of little interest. A man can lose a leg, lose a job, lose a love, but once he's in full knowledge of a certain potential of his mind, there's a certain thing that cannot be taken from him without his passive permission. To say that the full weight and momentum of the universe is structured in such a way as to be directly opposed to a man being able to hold on to this certain thing is to engage in fearless, hyperbolic understatement. Trying to solve the problems of man is the closest you can come to solving them. Trying to solve the problems of man is their solution. You see, a carousel is a self-perpetuating machine, and nothing breaks down on a merry-go-round that can't be fixed on board. To see beyond the distorting glare of city lights, the concept of problems must be redefined. Or put another way, who finds fault with Nero save those who live in Rome? And who cares where art is headed except those who care about art? Is it not interesting that all of those who've had the experience and seen life head on, not one had a harsh or critical word to say about it? One man, having scant success in reeling in his mind as a stopgap measure, broke its watch. One day in a clearing near the woods, a lion and a computer met and fell into conversation, with the machine becoming hopelessly entangled in trying to conceive of what the lion meant by the idea of doing, and the beast completely unable to comprehend why anyone would be interested in anything they couldn't eat. Jazz soloists complain about others stepping on their note, while amidst man's everyday mental and verbal life, were this not the case, the whole structure would collapse. The mortal solutions to problems and answers to questions. People came up with the idea of man having a spirit of some kind after the mind early on told them to look someplace else. From that certain outside view, you could say that there's this danger of the ordinary taking ordinary life too seriously. But fair is fair to even a bear, and we should go on with it and also note that there's a danger of the mystically inclined taking the mystical too seriously in a certain manner. And I will point out that this certain manner unconditionally involves thinking. The mythical Orient Express, once again. One man who dearly wanted to see Istanbul had to stop hanging around the Paris train station when he realized that it was actually his own mind. There was once a man who invented a land submarine, and he could live quietly down in the body of the ship or peer out at life through the periscope. He says he wants you to know that he has nothing whatsoever to do with kings and their two types of armies or of lines and computers conversing. Once upon a time, a certain mystic stopped and thought, even after you reach a place of apparently knowing all there is to know, then your personal experiencing of it begins to widen and deepen. One man says that it all comes down to this. After you've discovered fire, invented the wheel, and cured gingivitis, what are you going to do with your mind anyway? I read one word wrong and I can't stand it. One man says that it all comes down to this. After you've discovered fire, invented the wheel, and cured gingivitis, what are you going to do with the mind then? Once you see life directly, cutting down on talking is not the problem. A certain villager with, shall we say, certain non-routine interest, who had recently on several occasions run afoul of the king's lawmen, had it suggested to him that perhaps the authorities were out to get him. But he waved away the notion, saying that even if true, he had much larger problems than could ever be presented to him by all the royal forces combined. Moral: 'tis good to know where the rats and skeletons are buried. Son of moral: 'tis not so appetizing to discover that they may be stashed up under your toupee. On one world, soon after each creature is born, there is a place to which they can go, and in a certain fashion hide themselves away. The area is striking in that it is contained and confined, and at the same time open and infinite. Star finding. It accomplishes nothing to know where you are if you don't want to know where you are. Intergalactic pinpointing. Self-protection is a proper function under but two conditions. One is regarding the body, and the other is if, in your head, you still believe you have a self. And I said, in your head. Once upon a time, one cosmic force looked at another cosmic force and said, "Why do men keep complaining about never being able to satisfy their minds? What the hell they think the purpose is anyway?" And the second force could only shake its head in bemused recognition. Thinking. The nuts and bolts of it. Unless you do something extraordinary about it, you'll think whatever life wants you to think. Now you too can nod along with that, using that certain kind of unique human chagrin. Every time he heard the term the known universe used, this one man would think, who cares? Try nodding to that one. And finally, seriousness, the nails and screws of it. Nothing in life is serious unless it happens to a man personally. And even then it's really not. Okay, now, final nod. And of course, be especially careful, any of you who are going to sit up in the back window of the car. Well, several seem to have jumped out here into my lovely assistant's hands. One day, one man's thoughts said to him, "Can Billy come out and play?" And he suddenly realized that for many years he'd been absent-mindedly acquiescing in such matters, with his intellect having reached its present age without him actually knowing where its time had been spent. There's a certain kind of sailor whose vessel is at its most stable when the seas are at their worst. To an ant, every foot is a foe, and to a deer, every carnivore. But note, the dangers to each creature are selective and limited, save with man in the matter of his mind. Trying to solve the problems of man is the closest you can come to solving them. You see, a carousel is a self-perpetuating machine, and nothing breaks down on a merry-go-round that can't be fixed on board. To describe the state of consciousness to which so many people like to speak and dream of, as being a kind of, quoting my own interpretation of it, a kind of consciousness without comment. It is, again, not a matter that you have stopped the traffic. It is a matter that a man can remove himself from the porch, that he can get a step away, because as long, back to my other metaphor, as long as you're on the porch, no matter where you're standing on the porch, no matter how you're dressed on the porch, remembering that you were born on the porch. Anywhere on that porch, you are inseparably connected to the traffic itself, and that all ordinary questions, all sane questions ordinary men have regarding the propriety of certain of their thoughts, regarding the truthfulness, regarding the decency, regarding the usefulness of such thoughts, are all, at another level, useless. And as long as you are on the porch, as long as you take the traffic, as long as you take what you think to be actually what you think, and as long as you take what you think to be even in a non-specifically diagnosed sense, you take your thoughts as being you, which the more civilized you are on a continual, gradual scale, the more civilized you are, the more that you are dependent upon the mind, the more that you are dependent upon words, the less that you are a semi-feral creature living out in the woods and having to fight for your daily bread to survive, then the more, without any specific analyzation necessary, but the more you take what goes on in your head as being the full representation of you. The only way that seems to pop out, the more civilized you are, is in areas of recreational physiquing. Simply a throwback, instead of now you having to get out and hunt each day for food, would now be a matter of sexual instead of nutritional survival, that nowadays, the more civilized you are, the only way that you give much credence, much attention to your body as being you is on the basis of sexual attraction, losing weight, etc. Working out, having your hair done. The very things, there's nothing wrong with it, they are things having nothing to do with other than what they seem to have something to do with, which is just out and out sex. So the rest of the area, all you got to do is check with you, the rest of the area that an ordinary civilized man thinks of as being himself is in his head, what he thinks. And as long as you take what you think now, and there is nothing else to say after that, there are no parenthetical statements, there are no conditions that are of any value whatsoever, ever. So after that, say, yeah, but you don't know what I think. It does not matter. It has never mattered, it doesn't matter now, and it's not going to matter in the foreseeable mystical future. Even though it's dangerous and unprofitable, or not profitable, to predict the future, I will do that, because if I'm wrong and I'm dead, sue me. Make fun of me. But into the foreseeable, transcendental future, it's still the same way. It does not matter what you think. And it's only ordinary people who thinks it matters. As long as you're on the porch, to use my picture, I said that I was speaking again, referring to poverty actually equals freedom. But it's not on the matter of simply stripping yourself of useless possessions in life. It's being able to strip yourself of useless thinking. And then ordinary men will go, well, that sounds good. What kind? And you go, all. And they immediately recognize you for what you are, insane. Well, using insane as being synonymous with those who demand the impossible. There is nothing that goes on in a man's mind that has anything to do with being more conscious. There's nothing that goes on in a man's mind that has anything directly to do with him solving what seems to be the problems of life, which we're placing at a much lower, it's not even the same operational breadth, but at a much lower level than someone attempting to become more conscious. I put it to you in one of the items that trying to solve the problems of man is the closest that they can come to being solved. If in some way you had some sort of full, continuing operational realization of that, I suggest that it would have an absolute neural shaking effect. And of course the words, like always, you can say the words and people, I'm not just saying this, but you go back if you want to read it in a certain way, and those that you might have thought had apparently left written records of some kind of their great mystical struggle, will point out the same thing, that there were things that they knew for years and years and years and years, even taught them, and then one day they thought, Jesus, I hate to say the rest, ellipsis. They went, good grief. Of course they didn't really. But I can say that what a man thinks is useless, and there's no way to say the human problems, but trying to solve the problems is the closest you can come to it. And even if that didn't make sense at first blush, I can shortly make it make rational, rhetorical sense. And people, I'm sure, can listen to it, certain kinds of people, and go, that's true, that's true. But they would again take it as being a criticism of life and not simply a cold-blooded, unnatural description. Trying to solve the problems of life, trying to solve the problems of man. And now let's remind you again that we're speaking really of the man's and the upper stories of his nervous system. That we're assuming now, anyone who hears that the problems of man, your problems, are not one of day-to-day survival physically. It's a day-to-day survival mentally, trying to hold on to all your marbles and keep them at least flat enough on the porch that one of those kind of institutional vehicles from places that have bars on the windows and won't let the people therein keep matches or shoestrings, that they might, you hope that they will not go by the porch and suddenly you hear the screech of brakes and it backs up and you see everybody inside the truck pointing at you. And you think, boy, I wish I could run for my life if I had one. It is not the sort of thing that a person can keep any continual awareness of. As long as you're thinking, as long as you take what you think seriously, and as long as you stay stuck to your porch. And may I refresh your memory that one of my fairly recent uses of my picturization of the porch and the traffic having to do with a man's mind and thinking is the fact that the porch has been painted with some sort of polyurethane, some sort of finish that seriously, quite truthfully, makes it darn near impossible to ever get your feet up. You can stand there and almost do some sort of dance with your feet even stuck to the floor because you can move around, move your hips. And I'd give you enough credit and say that some people can almost get like a heel up of one foot, or maybe even a toe up over here. But forget about getting a foot up. You are stuck there as long as you take the porch to be you, as long as you take the noise to be you, as long as you take the relationship to have any valid authenticity that is between your mind and what you think, that, well, in some way I'm getting somewhere, I'm thinking something, I'm working on problems. Trying to solve the problems of man is the closest you can come to solving them. If we may jump forward, without me having to attempt to prove any more the scientific chemical basis of this statement. You can see it eventually, very clearly, and you may say that you can see it now, but once it really strikes you through your own understanding, it has a tendency to put everything into a different key, if you're a musician, let's say. Because trying to solve the problems of man, and back to man, you can take it individually now, that remember, we're not speaking physically. We're not speaking about the problem being one of mere or simple physical survival each day. That you're attempting to survive mentally, you're attempting to straighten out things in your life. If you're ordinary, you would figure that you had some sorts of real mental problems or personality or semi-personality dysfunctions. According to how much kind of sympathy you want and how slow the conversation was at the bar. But then everybody, the problems they're dealing with nowadays, if you're not dealing with physical survival, there's only the other kind of problem. Ordinary people might call it personality problem, etc. Interpersonal relationships, they can call it anything they want to. But it's this. If it's not this, it's this. trying to solve the problem is the closest. Trying to solve the problems of man, the unique problems of man, which is this, as opposed to this. Trying to solve the problems of man is the closest that you can come to solving them. I wish I had brought along the all-choir chorus tonight, that we could have all sort of sung along, or at least had them softly in the background start bringing up and them singing it over and over and over and over. But skipping all of that, if you will rhetorically go far enough, theoretically go far enough to accept that and then ponder if it were actually, unconditionally, a correct limning of how life operates at the ordinary city level of man, right through here, what does that say? Well, the obvious, if you can see it, it obviously says that the so-called problems of man cannot be solved. The statement itself indirectly indicates that. So we assume that, but then it says what's the closest, if you'll accept, which you could get ordinary people to accept, at least in specific anecdotal or local instances. You could try and get an ordinary man who was concerned about the problems of the world, the commonly publicly conceived problems of whatever he considered political injustice, economic injustice, poverty, who knows what. You could get him to probably admit that the problems of man, some of them, or like I said, you could probably get him to, if you said, what do you consider to be the problem? At any rate, you could get a man to probably say that, at least in some instance. Well, I didn't want to distract you with trying to be more, you'll hear me. You could get a reasonable man to agree that it's probably true that at least some, one or some of man's problems likely cannot be, quote, solved, that all you can do is a continuing effort to do so, a continuing attack on it. In other words, it's easy for someone to say, which they'll do, and say, well, we could cure all hunger on this planet. Do we have enough food stored in warehouses and food surplus here in the United States and other places that we could divide it all up and feed everybody in the world? And I don't know what you ever thought about it, but that's not true. Or even if it's true, it would be true for one day and things would be back more or less like they are, because life is running its own. Bread line, soup kitchen, life knows how many people it wants to be fed. Life is running it. But you could probably get that sort of man, which you obviously know I'm not making fun of hunger, but if he said, well, I consider the biggest problem world hunger, and even though people will say we could cure it, all we got to do is make up our minds, we could do it now if we just had a more equitable distribution of the world's wealth, etc. And you could probably get that man to admit, come on, there have been the hungry people, there have been the downtrodden of the world for what, 6,000 years that you know of. You go, yeah. You know, to say that we're going to solve it, like put an end to hunger once and for all, come on now. Just between, come on. And he might be the head of some great charitable enterprise, and even he might go, well, you're right, saying solve it is a bit dogmatic, and perhaps it is not solvable in the ultimate sense, but it is the sort of thing, yes, it is the sort of thing to which we should continually apply ourselves and do the best we can, that at least we can narrow it down, we can decrease it. You go, okay. The point being that ordinary people, no mystical inclinations, can be made to temporarily agree that, yeah, some problems, one or some of the so-called problems of life may not be literally solvable. Okay. I just want you to understand that there is a basis. A side trip for a second again, even though the point that I'm actually trying to get you to see is so blunt, it is so far outside of the mental operations of man that people will not consider it. But what I'm trying to get you to see is that if you take somebody under reasonable, non-accusatory and non-threatening circumstances, you can get a man to see some of this. You can get him to go, well, you're right, some of the problems are one or two, but some of them are probably, even though I may have said that at first we could cure hunger, or we could cure social injustice. But, not you put it that way, just between you and I don't know that it's solvable in the sense that something's solved and you put it away and it never happens again. The point I'm trying to get you considered, just off to the side for a second, is the things that can sound so extreme as this. Of course, you've been around here too long. I can say things that are extreme from the ordinary view, and you think, yeah. but to remind you that these are actually extreme, literally. That the problems of man, the closest you can come to solving them, is trying to solve them. But as extreme as that could sound to an ordinary person, they can be made to agree. That is, they can be made to see that it's not all that extreme, but I got to go. The mind just, it has nothing to do with it. It can't stand there and hold it. It's like, well, okay, I got it. And I'm going, do. And it goes like, well, would you take it back? I got to go. I don't know what to do with this. You made me see it for a second, but here, take it back. And all you can do, if you're not going to irritate them, is take it back. So, okay. And then you feel like it never happened unless they ever bring it up again. Now back to the main course, the main path. If you see that it's operationally true, you can put your own terms on it, but if you see what I am pointing at, that trying to solve the problems of man, not but here, trying to solve the problems of man is the closest that you can come to solving them. Having pointed out that which now should be obvious, that the statement indicates, without specifically verbally doing so, that problems cannot be solved. But then it says the closest you can come is trying to. Back to my fictitious, sane, ordinary man that previously agreed that, well, perhaps some problems cannot actually be solved in the sense of them being finally wrapped up, never to reoccur. But then if he considered this, if I could get him back in that mood for a second, and he considered the full ramification of what that says, that well, you're saying that the closest we ever come is trying to solve them, he might even, what if I sort of raised an eyebrow when I said it? Then he might go, wait a minute, you're kind of being smart-ass about it, aren't you? There's some kind of, there's a little more in there, isn't there? I mean, you're saying that's all sort of a waste of time, or men are deluding themselves, or it's all some sort of hypnotist show, some sort of illusion. That's a child's way out. My tooth hurts. Oh, no, it doesn't. It's your imagination. Everybody remember that? I can't go to sleep. It's too early. I'm all awake. No, that's your imagination. You go lay down, be all right. A couple of times you forgot all about what imagination meant, because you caught on what it meant was the dominant wolf here in our local pack makes me go to bed, makes me shut up when I say my tooth hurts. That's your imagination. Or an ordinary man could discount what I was saying as, well, it's imagination to say that they cannot be solved. No. It's not imagination. If you begin to see it, the continual attempt, the trying to solve the problems of man. And now would you like to change the terminology a bit? The trying to figure out, the trying to unravel, to unfold, to map out, to take a new view of, to gain some understanding of the mind. Because every time men talk about problems of the mind, they're talking about one thing: I don't understand what's going on. It would no longer be profitable. It's not near pseudo complex enough in ordinary terms for that sort of view to be taken. Trust me. Hold on a second. That is, ordinary sophisticated people, which you can all have seen already, that nowadays, that is one of these signs of sophistication, up-to-dateness, intelligence, sanity, is to admit, you should admit, that you do have certain mental challenges, peccadillos, personality quirks. There are things, had you the time, had you the wherewithal to apply yourself to psychiatric treatment, or perhaps just reading books, but there are certain you'll admit. I am not perfect, which proves you're sane. I am not perfect, and there are things in my mind, there are things in my personality, they might want to say, that could certainly use a little refurbishing, a little sanding down, a little paint, maybe drive them down a little bit. There are things, they're rough edges. Hey, I'm human. They will say all of that, and of course they can be more specific. They can say, well, I have, obviously I don't understand, but I have subconscious negative feelings toward the opposite sex. I have unresolved childhood traumas that are now affecting my attitude toward people of a different religion. who knows what. You know how it goes. They all sound as though they're variations of certain, well, they're types of illnesses or types of maladies. You don't have to say that you are mentally insane. And I know that people nowadays don't like to say I'm mentally ill. They just simply say that I am not, speaking personality-wise, perfect. And everybody agrees. All the other sane people, well, certainly. That's not in question. But every time that men, whatever terms they use, are speaking of their mental foibles, their personality, their negative personality traits, their subconscious, unconscious, their traumas, their unresolved conflicts, blah, blah, they're talking about one thing. They will never see it this way. It's too blunt. It is the mind trying to figure itself out. It's a tree trying to climb itself under those ordinary conditions, which even the tree will go, ah, come on. And so then it immediately has to come up with whole schools, whole new areas. If it had been a tree doing it, it would have come up with psychiatry or sociology, and it had been something about, I guess, barkology. You understand? It would have had to be something, but that is what all of man's complaints, that is what all of man's problems, again, up here, not down here. These problems can be explained in a way that the ordinary mind will not tolerate or see any merit therein, but that all of these problems are the mind trying to understand itself. And if that sounds too pat to you, consider the people, an ordinary sane person, educated person, attempting to explain one of his problems. That he might say, I have, in fact, been reading, I have various times in my life been undergoing psychiatric analysis and counseling, and I certainly don't have all of the answers yet, but I feel as though I have made some progress, and there is no doubt, and I've had 2 psychiatrists now have agreed with me, as much as a psychiatrist will outright, of course, but have agreed that there is no doubt that part of what is driving my subconscious mental life, and of course then coloring everything I try to do in life, is somewhere I have an unresolved conflict either with my mother or some important female figure in my life, and I can't quite come up with it. We're all used to hearing that, and you go, well, huh? What is that saying, though? I can cut right through all that. It's the mind trying to figure itself out. And I am not misstating it, because think about even the person. If I could get my fictitious person again, the man who just said that, and get him under certain conditions momentarily, I could get an ordinary person if I said, you realize everything you just explained. I'm not arguing what you said about unresolved conflicts, obviously you think have to do with some negative occurrence with either your mother or some past female figure. I said, all right, but just listen to me. Do you understand in one sense, we could call that whole thing, it's the mind trying to figure itself out. And at first he'd go, no. And you go, but listen. Because if the mind could figure itself out right now, if your mind could figure itself out, trust me, just wouldn't it, whatever it is you're talking about, would you not then know what it was? And he'd have to go, well, yeah. But, because it's way too blunt, it's too plain, but do you understand that is what it all is? It's what religion is. It's the idea of making up gods, subconscious mind, it's all the same thing. It's art. All of this, man's civilization, in fact, that is the material output of this, is, in one sense, I didn't pull it out, but I had a news time tonight, it's an attempt, all of art and civilization, is an attempt for men to find something else to do other than just live life. Which they succeed in doing, because just live life would be that you were back in the conditions wherein each morning you had to get up and you had no idea, no certainty whatsoever, whether you would find enough food to feed yourself and those to whom you were responsible, your family. None. You had no good idea, based upon your past observation of your fellow Homo internal, Homo sapiens. You would have no assurance whatsoever. You would feel no particular comfort, assurance that you would even live through the day. Forget just finding food, you might end up being food for somebody else or for some other creature. So other than those kind of problems, the other kind of problem, no matter what it's called after that, is the mind attempting to figure itself out. I could make up the term, I could make it go fancier, but that is the fewest possible words that come to mind. Is the mind trying to figure itself out, because if it could figure itself out, then everything else expressed in art, of artists saying, well, I painted this, and you say, what does it mean? You say, well, I'm not sure even myself, but it seems to be the kind of way I get. I just throw paint. Well, yeah, that's obvious, and I go up sometimes, you see my footprint on it. Yeah, well, sometimes, I don't know, I'm going to tell you the truth. It's like I get so pissed and mad at the world, I could almost kill somebody, and I guess I'm better off doing this. And plus, sometimes I can sell them. Or a person can do it in a book. They can do it with their apparent everyday life. They can do it with their attempted verbal explanation of what they are through all the personal anecdotes about who they are. That becomes their attempted art. But it's all based upon the mind trying to figure itself out. That's probably, at least for those who might be picking this up on short wave, it's probably too blunt. I should have given it another 2 seconds thought and come up with another description. But civilization itself, the normal operations of an ordinary man's mental life, if it does not have anything to do with survival, which we all know that periodically there are things that happen each day that you have to eat and etc., but the rest of it is the mind thinking about itself. An ordinary man will never conceive of it that way because he will say, well, I never think about my mind. I know that. He could say, well, I never even think about the word mind, to tell you the truth. I could have some viewer would probably say, well, I've thought the word mind, or heard it more, after watching your show for X amount of months or something, than I ever thought about it anymore. I mean, it's just, what is the mind? I kept thinking you were going to say something about mental illness or some kind of mind control or, something. You just keep talking about the mind, the mind, the mind, the mind. I never think about the mind. So he would deny, and I would, properly, predictably so, he would go, I never think about my mind. And all you got to do is check with yourself under all ordinary conditions out there on the porch. There you stand. Life is full of all kinds of intrigues, interests, apparent problems, rude noises out there in traffic, all kinds of things. And to ask a man under those conditions, do you ever stand on the porch with all this going on and in some way think about your own mind, worry about your own mind, just think about your mind? Do you ever? He'd go, no. And he's telling the truth. But everything else that he thinks about, if it has nothing to do directly with the physical survival of him, his physical survival, everything else, you can see it, is the mind thinking about itself. And that's it. What else does it have to think about? Which, if you begin to see that, is why things had to become, why they had to expand, why the merry-go-round, they had to put on additional horses, why they had to paint them, why they had to go from just horses to swines and then bulls and elephants. Because if you just told the mind, I could make up another story, creation, God looks down at man, life looks at man, he says, all right, I'm going to make you a mind. You're a brand new creature, I'm going to give you a mind. And the little Homo sapiens went, wow, what is it? And he said, all right, here's what it is. You can do things that are not immediately important to survival. And so he goes, wham, and you got a mind. You go, ooh. And he goes, what did I think about? And he says, think about the mind. Or he could have said this. I'm having to make it up on the spot. Life said, well, what are you thinking about already? And it went, well, just myself. And then maybe even life. If it was the first time life ever done it, even life may have thought immediately like, well, what else is it going to think about other than itself? So what did it do? Or if you want to look at it from the more mortally centered perspective, what did man do? Once he realized, my mind, God, what a great toy. X amount of time goes by. Woo! But the mind does one thing and one thing only. It only has one interest. Remember, we're discounting the fact that you're surviving. The mind is not now, at the particular time we're talking about, having to be an active participant and partner in keeping you alive. That you're in the position that you can just almost lay there and be fed and survive. So then the mind goes, wow, what a great thing I got here. And it thinks and it thinks and it thinks. And what does it think about? Itself. I suggest to you, we can all identify with this, realize this, that very shortly it got boring as hell. And so man had to think, well, God always had so much to think about. There, my friends, was the first steps in civilization. All of art, all of civilization, all of literature, everything that is non-essential for survival came from a kind of boredom. Now back to the problem. The mind is now trying to figure itself off. It's like it's gone off in this kind of direction. And to remind any strangers, this is not a call to let's go back. Let's go back. We can't go back. But now it has gone in such a direction that it no longer can easily see. It can be made to see, but then immediately forgets it, like trying to hold on to a great gob of boiling hot hog fat. You can't hold on to it, but the mind cannot see that the only thing it does, under many, many guises, under many, many different names, is all it does is think about itself. That's all it can do. It thinks about physical survival and then itself. And we're discounting the first as a being of no continuing importance to man nowadays, kind of people listening to this. And so the mind is left with one thing, thinking about itself. But, inasmuch as that would become very dull, very shortly, now men can think, well, I am thinking about all sorts of things. One of the great ones is different time zones, thinking about the future and the past. But it thinks about all sorts of things. It thinks about money. It thinks about wealth. It thinks about checking accounts. It thinks about a new car. It thinks about all sorts of things, but it's thinking about the same thing. If it's not survival, once you see it, it's real easy. I mean, it's just obvious. It only thinks about itself. And it has problems, because what it thinks about itself under different names is always a matter of what it wants, how it wishes things were different. And therefore, it ends up with, I believe, ordinary people call it, so what do they call it? Problems. And so they think, well, I will solve the problem. Now, you can solve the problem of being hungry. Even a man with a very limited tempo to his neural activity. Not real, our kind of guy, kind of a dullard. But given within reasonable parameters, so that's the way dullards talk. They will find something to eat when hungry, right? They can solve the problem. Anyone can solve the problem of survival from this view. The other problem, the problems that are uniquely man problems, are all one of a non-physical nature, and can they be solved? Emphatically, what? Oh. Yes, except the solving is in the attempt to solve them. But notice where that leaves everyone. Everyone else, ordinarily on the merry-go-round, everyone is what? Railing, carping, hectoring. Known amongst us dullards as bitching, complaining. What the hell's going on here? Well, it's going round and around and around. Yeah, but I don't like it. Wait a minute, something is wrong here. We keep discussing the same things. We keep having the same problems. And I think it's about time we put our foot down. Well, do you realize if we're going to talk, let's put the front porch now on a merry-go-round. You can put your foot down while on a merry-go-round and just be just as adamant as hell. Or as us dullards say, as adamant as all get out. And go, by God, I've had enough. I draw the line right here. I put up with these kind of fallacious, illusionary problems as long as I will. And let it be known here. Let the king know. And all of his prime ministers know that, by God, I, Nathaniel, what's his name, drew the line, put down my foot right here. This kind of crap shall go no further. Here is my proof. Do I have to, you understand, he threw down his foot, figuratively speaking, the intellectual gauntlet, that I've had enough. This is going to stop here. And apparently it did, other than the fact that he's on a merry-go-round. So you can stomp your foot forever and say, this is it. You want it another way? You can draw a line on a merry-go-round and dare problems. Dare life, dare local conditions, dare them. Step over this line. Step over this line. And at first you think, well, I have proven a point. At least I know where I am. There was another one in there tonight that there was a moral to a story that I won't repeat. But the moral was, knowing where you are don't do a lot of good unless you want to know where you are. And ordinary minds would say, well, we do want to know where we are. Wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Or incorrect, incorrect. All you got to do is ask people, would you like to know what's going on in life? And they go, well, yeah. And if in some way you trick them or you say, well, hey, I met God's son, his stepdaughter or somebody. I know what's going on. Don't ask me how. I know, and I only got a second. You want to know? And everybody go, yeah. But they don't. And it's nothing personal to them. Their mind doesn't. Because if their mind knew what was going on, they would suddenly have, several ways I can put it. One is, have no reason to live. I guess that about covers it. And I do not mean literally that they would, be suicidal, but you would have taken what little joy most people find intellectually available in life, what little joy and pleasure they have, you would have gone, and even that little teeny weeny bit would be gone. But think about it. It started off that sounded to be every great intention in the world. That if somebody said, you want to know, would you like to have all this thought? Would you like to know what the mind's actually about and what's going on? And they go, yeah. And you go, well, it's a one time, once every billion years, the great cosmos send down the message, and they sent it to me, I don't know why, and they said I could tell everybody to show up in the next hour. And they all show up, and they're happy. You would be too. And it says, all right, here it is, and assuming you could tell them in words and they could hear it, would they have benefited? Would they be happy? No. Because well, at first they might go, wow. It's reaching the point that all verbiage is breaking down, some of you know. The point is they would not have benefited. What would be the benefit to find out that you're on a merry-go-round? Just to use, I don't mean that my descriptions are literally and fully descriptive, but what if you found out that you were playing some kind of, what was the game where they used to make you spin around as a kid until you threw up? Well, at least us guys, us real children, not you women. But the kind of thing, they'd make you spin. Other guys would dare you to keep spinning around until you get so sick you'd throw up and fall down and then couldn't even get up. What if the great secret of life, what if God came down, or the great cosmic force said, all right, I'm going to tell you, and it tells you, and it was something like that you realize that you're in some kind of eternal, well, for 70 years, spinning contest. Or that you are on a merry-go-round, or that there is no cure, there is no solving of what you think of as the problems and the questions. What if you suddenly saw that? And it started out that you thought this will be of great benefit, to say the least. And it turns out it's of anything but great benefit. That is why people would prefer, and I'm speaking very colloquially now, that people would prefer to have the problems to work on. Now, they don't look at it that way. They will certainly deny it if they're sane. No sane person, if you said, did you realize I could cure all the problems in the world? No sane person is going to say, I don't want them cured. You know that. They'd say, well, if it's true, do it. No. And we're not talking about hunger. We're talking about this. It is the continual attempt to solve them. The practical aspect of this in the last 2 or 3 seconds is it should be obvious. That's the coda. That's the ending. That's the final 7 flatted 9. That's the end of it. But once you see it, it sure does, and I mean actually see it, may I say this, it really takes a load off your merry-go-round. Shoulders. Shoulders. Or it takes a merry-go-round off your shoulders.